Congratulations, sir, on your government's first anniversary. You had your task almost cut out when you took charge almost a year back. Some good policies, a bit of fortune, and the economy looks in much better shape, much like you yourself. And this early morning walk does prove your fitness. But on the economy, in much better shape today?
Certainly, it's recovering. But I'm quite certain that in days and months to come, it should look much better. And that probably will depend on a large number of factors. But I think we are on the upward movement.
Let me just take this back exactly to a year, the day you took oath of office on the 26th of May, 2014. On hindsight, do you believe that the expectations from your government were perhaps unrealistic at one level, especially on the economic front? You've taken a lot of decisions, there is no denying that. But do you believe there was unbridled euphoria that has perhaps now made way for cautious optimism at one level?
You see, there is bound to be optimism, bound to be expectations. And I don't regret that. In fact, I'd rather encourage that. And I'm in no mood to taper down expectations. And the reason is this. You had terrible governance, particularly in UPA 2.
That's right.
And terrible because you had all kinds of allegations of corruption, you had policy paralysis, you had a downward movement, you had the investors just moving away as far as the country is concerned. And when situations of this kind arise, people expect a change.
That's right.
And people are restless. Since then, we've brought a change. You have a decisive leadership.
That's right.
You have a government where the last word belongs to the Prime Minister, and that is how it should be.
True.
You have a very large number of decisions almost week after week being taken.
Precisely.
Structural changes going on. And I would say, ever since 1991, when significant changes took place, this is probably one important phase of the Indian economy where
it qualifies to be
where
so.
the next generation of changes and reforms are being made in India. The direction is absolutely clear. We moved up. But I believe some restlessness of the people is justified. I myself am restless. For instance, I do believe that India's potential is not 7.5%, 8%.
That's right.
In today's given scenario, if all these decisions are effectively taken and implemented, India has a capacity to cross 9%, move towards a 10% growth. And people must be restless.
Right.
They must put pressures on government. They must put pressures on opposition and on elected representatives. That this is our movement and therefore we can't squander it away.
You are perhaps saying that because you're also delivering and so you wouldn't want that momentum to go. But do you think at one level, corporate India and investors, I mean two of the most important constituents at least of our channel, misread verdict 2014? Most people thought that, you know, it's almost as if you can steamroll opposition on the legislative front, which we haven't seen happen. So is that a misreading of verdict at one level? I
think there has to be a mature reading and an analysis of an Indian electorate and India's parliamentary democracy.
Right.
A decisive mandate in India is not an unencumbered mandate.
That's right.
And this is for the reason there is a very significant section in Indian politics which actually doesn't believe in reforms. They don't understand the
You choose to call them obstructionist politicians.
No, it's not only obstructionist, they don't realize the significance. Now, I visited Dr. Manmohan Singh one of these last few months and I was asking him about the 91 to 96 period where I think he did a very good job. And he told me that within the government and his party, during that period, which was probably one of the better phases of his life, he virtually stood isolated. Even on the reform front? On the reform front. Even though the Prime Minister, Mr. Narasimha Rao, was backing him, he said at one meeting of the party's working committee, everybody blasted me. For taking the decisions that he did? Except Mr. Sathe and one more person. Yeah. Who came and then supported him. And I think the changes he brought about did create an impact for the future. Fair point. And therefore, Indian political system is slowly realizing the impact of this. For instance, UPA 1 and 2 did not realize the impact. They thought reforms only means you redistribute the existing resource.
And it's also a bit of populism.
And that will bring you the electorate to you. Now, India has to concentrate on increasing productivity, not merely redistributing the existing resource.
That's right.
Because the earlier would then result in distribution of poverty rather than generation of wealth and distributing it.
Fair point. So, you know, we've been speaking to a whole host of corporates as we celebrate your government's anniversary. You know, broadly they say the government has delivered, but there's still this sense of impatience. Do you get that sense of impatience as well? And I've had some close access to you now over the last 1 year, and you're very, very task-oriented. Do you believe you could have done more, done a lot better, or do you concede this is the best you could have done given the circumstances?
See, politics has its own dynamism. You have executive decisions which you can take. Each decision has its own life. You have to explain it to people.
Right.
You have to explain the impact of this to people. You have the risk of people with a confused mind thinking that growth-oriented politics is only corporate-oriented politics. In fact, the best response to poverty is growth.
Exactly, and they say that a rising tide lifts all boats. Isn't it ironical, sir, that on the economic front, you know, the strong view is that the government could have done with more reforms, and yet the political narrative, unfortunately, is that this government is pro-corporate and anti-poor. How ironical are the two arguments?
No, there are some confused minds in the media, and I've been able to spot them. And I, of course, don't want to identify them.
Right.
But they are uncomfortable with the Modi government in power. And therefore, on day one, their news or editorial line is the government is pro-corporate. The alternative day, their line is the corporates are anti-government.
So that's very ironical. Both situations
It is ridiculous.
Yes, yes.
It is ridiculous. Because I have repeatedly said, this government will expand businesses, use the enriched resource of the government for the poor. Therefore, economy growing is going to help the poor.
Right.
But this government doesn't believe in crony capitalism.
Sir, I want to speak to you about the investment climate. Corporates, when you speak to them, are confident, and yet they're not investing. I'm sure you've been speaking to industrialists as well. Why do you think they're not willing to loosen their purse strings just yet? And also, at one level, do you believe there's a bit of a double speak here? They say one thing, they're still not investing. Are you disappointed at one level with corporate India for the double speak? Why is investment not happening after all?
You see, there is, on investment, I think there are two important strong points and one of caution. Foreign direct investment is picking up.
Right.
FIIs, I don't consider that to be really an investment for infrastructure and so on.
Right.
But as far as FDI is concerned, it's picked up. The second, public investment
will have to take the lead.
Will have to take the lead and is taking the lead.
Right.
But then there is a downside. The downside is that our banking system,
is in a bit of a mess
as a result of the slowdown, when I resumed power during the UPA, had almost 6% NPAs.
That's right.
And probably an equal amount of stressed assets. Banks were unwilling to lend, borrowers were unwilling to borrow. The interest rates were partly also responsible for this because you had a double-digit inflation, 11% inflation scenario.
Right.
And therefore, the capacities of the corporates themselves had been overstretched. Now, I can take a very cynical view and saying the government is doing so much. What is it the corporates are doing? I'm in no mood to ask questions. In any case, people in a democracy ask governments questions. You don't ask questions to private sector.
Right, right.
We have to create an environment, as far as the state is concerned, and that's my responsibility.
That's right.
Where the corporate sector finds it comfortable and at comfort to invest.
That's right.
Therefore,
and which is exactly what you're trying to do
Therefore, the rates have to go down, which are moving downwards.
you know, one of the things that you rightly pointed out is the high interest rate regime, and I'm reasonably certain that Governor Rajan is going to be watching this interaction with you. Do you believe, are you disappointed with the pace of rate reduction, and do you believe because there's a limited window available due to the Fed rate hike, the RBI should move more proactively? And as the, I know it's an independent body, but from the finance minister, are you expecting a rate cut on the 2nd of June?
You see, I have always said that I am expecting what everybody expects, and that's a unanimous view in this country.
Right.
I am also a party to that opinion. But then the RBI has a responsibility of looking at various factors.
That's right.
They have to keep inflation under control. So therefore, from 11% to bring it down to 5%, for wholesale inflation to come down
In the negative territory
in
now.
the negative, then this thing. This is one management, which is also their responsibility.
True.
They've moved in that direction. And therefore, every governor and every RBI will have their own way of doing the balancing act. And I'm sure they are doing it.
Right.
We are obviously at liberty to comment. Many would like it to be much faster. Those in power have to do a more balanced job.
So, you know, while at the RBI, I have a very candid question to ask of you. You're not someone who minces his words. The whole PDMA issue, the fact that you wanted to take bond management away from RBI, but then you conceded and deleted that portion from the finance bill. I know, I mean, like I mentioned earlier, you're a very task-oriented person. I'm sure this was an issue that disturbed you. Why was it there in the first place? Do you believe at one level, now that, you know, it's all done, were you ill-advised in this matter?
No, I don't think I was ill-advised. Those who advise on these matters looked at the entire history of the last 2 decades.
Right.
Report after report, including Governor Rajan's own report when he was in the finance ministry, has clearly said that this has to be an independent agency.
True.
And therefore, working within the RBI indefinitely is not possible. So gradually it has to move out. Now, I've had discussions with the RBI both before and after the budget. I don't think in principle there is a problem.
That's right.
There is a problem how to do it in a phased manner. The government today doesn't have a structure who can do the PDMA management.
That's right, yes.
It's the RBI which has the structure. And the RBI structure will then gradually have to move to the government. And that, it won't move under the government, it will move as an independent agency, and then they have to develop their own structure. It is therefore necessary that instead of doing it surgically, you have consultations with the RBI.
And do it in a more phased manner.
Do it in a manner and in a timetable that both the government, policymakers and the RBI are comfortable with.
So, I have a very quick question on MAT, because that is something that has disturbed a lot of investors. On hindsight, do you believe that the government underestimated the damage on this account? The fact that you've set up an expert panel does seem to suggest that many issues still perhaps remain to be sorted out.
Everything is not very comfortable and rosy if you are in government.
Right.
Now, MAT is one issue on which every comment being made about the government is unfair. For the reason, there is not a single NDA decision on taxation which has created adversity or any kind of hostile reaction in the market.
Yes, yes.
It's only legacy issues. MAT is again a legacy issue. The controversy over MAT arose in 2012, where the Advanced Ruling Authority took a view different from its own 2010 view.
Precisely.
Now, the problems was created by the FIIs themselves.
Who went to the advanced.
You had an existing opinion, you went for a fresh opinion and got a hostile opinion. Having got into 2012, you went off to sleep. And the government, of course, from 2012 to 2014 had stopped functioning, they were doing nothing.
Yes.
It's only in 2015 when the deadline came as to what do assessing officers do. Now, an assessing officer doesn't want CBI at his doorstep.
True.
You have a 2012 view, why did you not act accordingly? So these men and women had to issue notices and then take them in the direction of an assessment. It's then that everybody woke up. The FII is represented to me to say that this is an unfair situation, this goes contrary to the understanding of Indian law that they have. So I acted reasonably and clarified the law for the future.
Which is exactly my point. Do you believe at one level corporate India and FIIs are also using the tax bogey, the tax terror bogey, so to say, to evade what is genuinely due to the government?
Last week somebody walked into my room and said tax terrorism is at its peak. And I said, what have you been troubled with? And this was somebody I knew.
Yes.
And he said, we've got notice for holding an HSBC account in Geneva. So even the rogue evaders
are using this as a terror bogey.
Are using the terror bogey.
So I want to move on to the legislative part, and there is something that you're entirely throwing your weight behind that. That's what many people believe, the game-changing GST of sorts. I have a very candid question to ask of you. If you actually look at the numbers, you had the numbers to back you on that bill in the Rajya Sabha. You could have gone ahead with it, and yet you chose to go for the select panel. In one sense, have you preempted the opposition stunt to stall it at the state level? And do you believe the select panel will see it through? And how optimistic are you now of that April 1, 2016 deadline? You still believe you can
first, I had the numbers in the Lok Sabha. I wanted to give the right signal, so I passed the bill. I had thought that the Congress party leadership
will stand by this bill.
Because it was their bill, the changes we were making were mostly the standing committee recommendations under their government. And therefore, since they had been processed on file during the UPA, I didn't expect UPA to do a volte-face. Then it's a lesson for me also that I must try and explain to their leadership as to what the factual position is, because a section of their own leadership
is not informed enough.
Is not informing its top leaders. And I am reminded of a famous statement about some people in the Congress party. It was said about a politician in the United States. How much does he know? When will he know? I could have passed it, and then some state assemblies would have said, let's go slow.
Right, right.
Some would have said, we don't implement it, it was without our consent. And that is why I said,
let's wait.
Even a decisive mandate is not an unencumbered mandate.
You said that earlier.
And therefore, you have to carry everybody with us.
You know, it's strange that they did not support you on GST, something that was their bill and something that Standing Committee had recommended. It's very unlikely that they will support you on the land bill. How much of a rope are you willing to give the opposition on this?
Look at what the existing agrarian situation is. You have pressure on land. You have more people working to till that land than that land needs. And therefore, if the crop goes bad, so you have to take a large number of those people out, create rural employment.
In the past, matters of national importance have called for a joint session of Parliament. Is this a matter that calls for a joint session? Is this a matter of national importance?
You see, the fact is that the bill is before Parliament. There's a constitutional mechanism. There's a legal mechanism. Your joint committee recommendations are normally accepted by all.
That's right.
And therefore, if they are not accepted by some, we'll respond to it at that stage. If the joint committee makes some well-meaning changes, we are willing to look at them.
I have one last question on economics before I move on any further to politics, and that is FDI and multi-brand retail. You have said that your party and your government's position is very clear, and yet the DIPP has reiterated the earlier government stance. If I may just ask you very candidly, given your core constituents versus the investor interest and investor sentiment, is FDI and multi-brand retail too tough to endorse or too tough to abort publicly?
You see, the way we campaigned against it, it is difficult for us to endorse it.
That's right.
Frankly, because when we raised the opposition, this was one of the only areas where we had reservations about. And therefore, our enthusiastically endorsing it is something which the question doesn't arise.
Right.
It is there as a decision of the earlier government, so be it.
And so the states can do what they want with it. If I may take it completely political now, what do you make of this Rahul Gandhi 2.0, as it is being said to be? Does the BJP see him as a political threat? Because one senior minister after the other, I'm not talking about yourself, is feeling obliged to kind of refute what he's saying. Are you overstating his case in this process?
We are not, you are.
Okay.
You means the media. And therefore, you saw for 1 year this government without committing a mistake. I think one of the high points of this government is it hasn't committed a fundamental mistake in the first year.
Yes.
And people may comment on the pace, some may want it faster, some may want it slower, but we haven't committed a mistake. And therefore, even when he makes statements which display inadequate knowledge, let me give you an example. You look at the food park in Amethi. Relatively a project announced in 2010, abandoned in 2013. The private sector collaborator withdrew, and he, in his letter withdrawing, during the UPA says, those extra advantages which were promised to us
didn't come along.
He uses some phrase to that effect. And now you say, oh, why have you called it? So you see, merely because the facility of Parliament is available for making a point, I wish once in a while the points have some bearance with truth. You can't take liberties with fact on every occasion.
You know, sir, while the criticism from the opposition is warranted and it will come along, it is their job to oppose. I specifically want to point out the criticism that has come from one of your former cabinet colleagues, and that's Mr. Arun Jaitley, who refers to the Trimurti or the triumvirate of sorts, that decision-making has been monopolized between the Prime Minister, yourself, and Mr. Amit Shah. How do you refute or comment on that particular observation that has been made?
Well, who handled the WTO? And so effectively that we made it bend? Nirmala Sitharaman. Who's brought about the power sector and the coal sector reforms? Piyush Goyal. Who piloted the entire mineral law changes? Our the Mines Minister, Narendra Singh Tomar. Who is actively involved with the Prime Minister in management of the foreign policy? Sushma Swaraj. The new Kashmir experiment, which can, if it succeeds, pay huge dividends to India, to get mainstream parties on our side in the valley, Mr. Rajnath Singh.
That's right.
Now, every minister in this government is moving in that direction. But then people need an opportunity to make a comment. I don't deny that opportunity.
But you know, sir, I thought you would say what's wrong with that. I mean, look at what we have gone through in the last 10 odd years. There was a lack of cohesive decision making right at the top. It wasn't a decisive.
You see, let's be very clear.
So what's wrong with the fact that, I mean, the three of you are the closest aides of each other. So what's wrong with the fact that you are making the decisions?
The last word in the party must belong to the party president. That's Amit Shah. The last word in the government must belong to the Prime Minister Narendra Modi. That is how it should be. Now the trouble is that people who haven't worked actively in this party and who don't know the internal functioning are at liberty to make a comment.
You know, sir, there has been plenty of talk, and I would want you to share the insight at this level, that the PMO is very centralized. I, for one, believe that the Prime Minister, like you said, should have the last word on anything in the government. But what about this perception that everything moves to the PMO?
You see, there is
no control. That
just as I said that there is the difference between UPA and NDA is a difference between crony capitalism and liberalization, which are different. That was what UPA 2 was, and that was what NDA is, the two extreme. I think there is a very important decision between centralization and being a hands-on Prime Minister. Because I have always said, I have personally never made critical comments about Dr. Manmohan Singh because I have always been very impressed with him, particularly because of what he did between 91 to 96. So I think the UPA leadership was very unfair to Dr. Manmohan Singh in as much as they didn't give him the last word. If they had given him the last word,
perhaps things would have been different.
India would have been a different place.
You are one of the very few cabinet ministers who have prior experience in governance. You worked as a minister with Mr. Vajpayee and now one of the closest aides of Prime Minister Modi. How different are the two as Prime Ministers? Who's a tougher boss?
You see, Mr. Vajpayee was far older at that age.
That's right.
And therefore his style had been different. I think he's one of the most charming, the 2-3 most charming people that I have met in Indian politics.
One of them has to be Mr. Vajpayee.
He's unquestionably one of them.
Yes.
And he would speak very little. Ministers would go to him with a problem. He would listen to them. Alternatively, in a cabinet meeting, he would endlessly allow a discussion. And then would look at one of the persons who'd made a very good suggestion and said, this is what we should do. He would at best improve upon that suggestion.
That's right.
The present Prime Minister is far younger. And
he's more a first among equals in that sense.
He can work 18, 20 hours a day. He's full of energy. But I must tell you, even in the cabinet, he allows discussions to take place on various viewpoints, people to contradict the views, give the alternative viewpoints. He changes his mind. He consults his cabinet colleagues. But he has a lot of time. He's not casual. He wants to go into each and every proposal, the implications of that.
Does he give enough time for the most powerful minister in his own cabinet to rest on Sundays or to rest over the weekends, long holidays? Or are those things of the past and are not going to exist for at least the next 4 years?
I think that's a genuine difficulty.
Oh.
But at the same time, one has to learn time management.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/ETNow.